The forgotten cabin. The forest loomed overhead, thick with towering pines and twisted underbrush that seemed to whisper in the wind. The late afternoon sun barely penetrated the dense canopy, casting long shadows across the narrow trail where 5 friends hiked deeper into the wilderness. It was supposed to be a weekend getaway, a break from the pressures of work, city life, and responsibilities, a chance to reconnect with nature. How much farther, Ryan, Leah asked, adjusting her backpack as they trekked deeper into the woods. Ryan, the self-proclaimed navigator, pulled out his map. Should be about another mile or so. There's a clearing where we can camp tonight. The group, made up of Ryan, Leah, Mark, Jamie, and Sarah, had set out on this hike with excitement, eager for an adventure. They had heard stories of the beauty of these woods, but as the sun sank lower, the forest seemed less welcoming. The trees seemed to grow denser, their gnarled branches intertwining like skeletal fingers overhead. As they continued, Mark stopped abruptly, his eyes narrowing ahead. "Wait, what's that?" He pointed off the trail to what looked like a small structure partially hidden by the thick underbrush. Ryan squinted. "Looks like an old cabin." "That's not on the map," Sarah remarked, her voice tinged with unease. The cabin was ancient, its wood weathered and gray, sagging with the weight of years. It sat hunched at the base of a hill, nearly swallowed by the forest around it. Ivy had crept up its walls, and the roof was caving in on one side. There were no signs of recent life, no tire tracks, no paths, no evidence that anyone had been there in years. "Do you think anyone lives here?" Jamie asked. "No way," Leah said, shivering despite the warmth of the evening. "It looks abandoned." Ryan, curious by nature, took a few steps closer. "We should check it out." Sarah hesitated, the unease gnawing at her. "I don't know. It looks creepy. Maybe we should just keep moving." But curiosity had already gripped the group. They edged closer, moving through the overgrown path toward the cabin. As they approached, the air seemed to grow heavier, colder, despite the mild evening. The forest, usually alive with the sounds of birds and rustling leaves, had fallen eerily silent. The door of the cabin hung slightly ajar, creaking softly in the wind. Ryan pushed it open with a slow groan, revealing a dusty, dim interior. The air inside was stale, thick with the scent of mold and decay. Cobwebs draped across the ceiling, and old, worn furniture sat rotting where it had been left long ago. Leah wrinkled her nose. "This place is disgusting." The group fanned out, exploring the small, one-room cabin. It was sparsely furnished, a decrepit wooden table, 2 chairs, and a small bed pushed into the corner. On the walls, old photographs hung crookedly, their glass frames smeared with dust. The images were faded, but the people in them were visible, somber faces staring back at them, their eyes blank and lifeless. "Look at these," Jamie said, picking up one of the frames. "These photos must be decades old." Ryan moved toward the far corner, where a large wooden chest sat partially open. He lifted the lid cautiously, revealing a pile of belongings, old clothes, books, and odd trinkets. As he rummaged through the chest, he found a small, leather-bound journal. The pages were yellowed and brittle, but still legible. "What's it say?" Leah asked, peering over his shoulder. Ryan flipped through the journal, his brow furrowing as he read aloud. "The cabin is cursed. Anyone who enters." Leah shivered. "Is this some kind of joke?" Ryan continued, his voice quieter now. "Anyone who enters the cabin becomes part of it, trapped forever." The words sent a chill through the group. Sarah backed away from the journal, shaking her head. "Let's get out of here. This place is giving me the creeps." But before they could move, Mark, who had been studying the walls, spoke up. Guys, you might want to see this." They turned to where he was pointing. Carved into the wooden walls, deep and jagged, were words, warnings. "Leave, get out." They watched. The words were scrawled everywhere, overlapping each other in frantic, uneven lines. A cold knot of fear tightened in Leah's stomach. Who did this? Just then, a soft creak echoed through the room, followed by a faint whisper, like breath on the wind. They all froze. "Did you hear that?" Jamie whispered, her voice trembling. Ryan nodded, his eyes wide. "It's probably just the wind." Before he could finish, the door to the cabin slammed shut with a thunderous bang, causing everyone to jump. Mark rushed to the door, yanking on the handle. It stuck. As panic began to rise in the group, the cabin seemed to come alive around them. The whispers grew louder, swirling around them, indecipherable but full of malice. Shadows flickered at the edges of their vision, darting between the cracks in the walls and the corners of the room. "We need to get out of here," Sarah cried, her voice cracking with fear. Ryan ran to the window, trying to pry it open, but it wouldn't budge. The glass was so thick with grime that it barely let any light in. Outside, the last rays of the setting sun disappeared, plunging the cabin into darkness. Then came the footsteps, heavy, deliberate, circling the cabin just beyond the walls. "Someone's out there," Leah whispered, backing away from the window. Jamie shook her head, tears in her eyes. No, this isn't happening. We need to get out. We have to." A sudden, loud crash echoed from the far side of the cabin. One of the chairs toppled over, as though an invisible force had thrown it. The air grew colder, and the whispers turned to low, guttural murmurs. Ryan lit a small lantern he'd brought with him, casting an eerie glow over the room. "We'll get out in the morning," he said, trying to stay calm. "We'll stay here tonight and leave at first light." Reluctantly, the group agreed. They gathered their sleeping bags and huddled together in the center of the room, trying to ignore the sounds, the footsteps, the whispers, the occasional tap on the walls. Sleep was impossible, but eventually exhaustion set in. Leah woke with a start in the dead of night, her heart racing. The cabin was silent, but something felt wrong. She glanced around and saw Jamie sitting up, staring blankly at the wall. "Jamie," Leah whispered. "What's wrong?" Jamie didn't respond. Her eyes were wide and her face was pale, as though she were in a trance. Leah shook her gently, but still, no response. Then, from outside, came a soft knock on the window. Leah froze, her blood turning to ice. Slowly, she turned to look. A face stared back at her through the grimy glass, but it wasn't human. The features were grotesque, twisted and melted, as if someone had tried to mold a face from wax and failed. Hollow eyes bore into her, and a gaping, toothless mouth opened and closed, as though trying to speak. Leah screamed, waking the others. The next few hours were a blur of terror. The group huddled together as the cabin seemed to breathe around them, the shadows moving on their own, the whispers turning into faint screams. The knocking on the windows grew louder, more insistent, until it felt like the whole cabin was surrounded. By the time dawn broke, they were all wide-eyed, exhausted, and desperate to leave. But when they opened the door, they found that the trail they had followed was gone. The forest stretched out before them in every direction, an endless sea of trees. No path, no markers, no way out. We came this way," Ryan stammered, looking around in confusion. The trail was right here, but it wasn't. The forest had changed. Panicked, they ran in every direction, trying to find the way back, but the more they searched, the more lost they became. It was as though the forest itself was shifting, trapping them within its depths. Hours passed. Their supplies dwindled. Fear turned to despair. By the time the second night fell, they realized the horrifying truth. The cabin had claimed them, and just as the journal had warned, they were now a part of it, trapped in the forgotten woods. Just like those who had come before them, no one would ever find them, and the whispers would never stop.